morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in from across the continent today. My name is Jesse. I'm here with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. And if you're joining us for the first time, like both our speakers and some of our classes are, then we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Now, everything we do goes through our YouTube channel, so if you want to share this with family and friends in like 3 weeks or 3 years, or check out like 3,500 other broadcasts we've done since 2014, you can go right there and do just that. Now, you're catching us on a particularly special day today because we are in day 3, our penultimate broadcast as part of our Changing Planet 3 series. Now, all year long, we've had the privilege and pleasure of partnering with Environment and Climate Change Canada to feature some of their amazing scientists and storytelling. In fact, it went so well the first 2 times that we had to bring on a whole 3rd series of Changing Planet 3. You can check out the full listing below and check out our last 2 broadcasts on birds and frogs, respectively, on that aforementioned YouTube channel. Now, today we are going to talk with Olaf Jensen, who's going to talk about some of his work making parks for animals. How do you balance the needs and rights of people and nature both? This is going to be one of the biggest questions in conservation in the decades to come, not just in Canada, but around the world. So it's a real pleasure to have you guys in as classrooms today to learn a little about this. And without further ado, for the first time joining us ever, I'm going to welcome in Olaf. Thank you so much for being here today, man.
Hey, thanks so much, Jesse. You've got a ton of enthusiasm, and it's really great to be here. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be on the screen.
My pleasure. Well, I know you've got a lot to share with us. If you want to bring up your presentation and dive in, I'm excited to learn as the kids, maybe more so. It's a pretty good gig.
Okay, so we've already got all the classes online, I guess, and we're ready to roll?
We are ready to roll. Let's do it.
Okay, super. All right, I've got, I'm assuming everyone can see this presentation. Once again, super excited to be here with you guys today. For those of you that are fans of Frozen, I'm sure you're already a bit disappointed that I'm not a snowman. Olaf is a bit of an unusual name. My parents' background is Danish and Dutch, which is where the name comes from. So very popular with Disney these days, not so popular elsewhere in Canada. Anyway, I'm here to not talk to you about Disney movies, but to talk to you about making parks for animals, which is my day job with Environment and Climate Change Canada with the Canadian Wildlife Service. So let me just set the scene here. We're going to be talking a little bit today about home and what's home for us and what's home for animals, and how do we make homes for animals that are that ensure that animals are safe and happy and can thrive into the future. So I know we've got at least one class here from the from Ottawa, from the Outaouais region. I live just north of Ottawa in Quebec, in the beautiful Outaouais region in the Gatineau Valley. This is some friends and my wife on a hilltop overlooking the Gatineau River south towards Ottawa, looking towards Gatineau Park. I'm really lucky to live here. I love this beautiful area and the forests. I'm sure you guys all live in some pretty beautiful and interesting places today as well, and we'll talk a little bit about home in a couple of minutes. So just to give you a bit of context, here's a little sign that if you're ever traveling around the country and you find one of these signs, you're going to be in one of the homes for nature, the parks for animals that I get to make along with a whole bunch of my colleagues here at Environment and Climate Change Canada. So these homes for animals, these parks for animals, are called National Wildlife Areas. The name doesn't matter too much. There's all kinds of parks and all kinds of protected areas around the country and around the world. They all have different purposes, but all of them have a common purpose, and that is to try and make homes for animals where the animals that are interesting and important to us that can thrive and survive into the future. So I know, Jesse, I don't know if it's possible to do it or if this is something better for the chat, but I'd love to hear about where is home for everybody else. And we can do that in the chat just as well if that's preferable. But I've got a couple of homework questions in my slides here to prompt a bit of a discussion later on. And one of them is a super easy question, and it's this one: where is home for you? But so for you guys in your classes, just give a bit of thought to, how you'd answer this question, not just the easy way, like I live in Ottawa, but what are some of the environments that are home for you that you really you really like. If you live in Ottawa, maybe your home is you know, at the lakeside, at the cottage, or at your summer camp, or maybe it's downtown in the city. If you're living out west somewhere, maybe home for you is in some prairie grassland park. But so keep that in mind. I'm going to ask you at the end here a little bit about what's your home like, and we'll dive into the rest of this presentation. That's probably the easiest, unless Jesse wants to tell me otherwise.
Oh, no, that's perfect, Olaf. I'll just note for me, just to sort of spark the discussion as well, I moved homes recently. So I went from Toronto in the heart of a major city. I was quite a bit away from any natural area, and now I'm in Western Newfoundland. So I'm surrounded by mountains and ocean, and I can go on a walk with a forest and a waterfall about 5 minutes from my house. So it's been this big radical shift, and I think that's going to sort of, I'm sure, be tied in some of our presentation to come. But I feel so lucky to be in such a natural area now. And anyone else who wants to share in the chat, please do YouTube StreamYard alike. We'd love to hear from you and your thoughts on where you live. But that's a great kickoff question, and I'll leave you to take us to our pronghorn antelope after that.
Okay, super. Thanks for that. So as Jesse said, yeah, feel free to use the chat function, or just make some notes, or do whatever you want to just think about this a little bit. I thought it would be fun just to get into this topic a little bit, to have you meet a few of my friends. So in the years I've been traveling and living in Canada, I've had the opportunity to, what I like to say, make some new friends with wildlife, and I want to share a few of them with you, just because there's a few friends I really like and thought you might like as well. I grew up in Saskatchewan, and one of my favorite friends is the pronghorn antelope. For given that this is a science presentation, I thought it was important to not just put the English name, the common name of this really important species, but also add the Latin name, which is underneath the pronghorn antelope there, Antilocapra americana. The Latin names are really interesting, because if you guys, maybe you've done this already, or maybe you will, but when you learn about the classification of life on Earth, the Latin classification structure is really important. And it hints a little bit about how these animals relate to other animals. So this friend of mine, the pronghorn antelope, is famous because it's the fastest land animal in North America. It's native to Saskatchewan, Alberta, and sometimes Manitoba, and it can run up to 90 kilometers an hour. It's a rare species in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of cousins. It doesn't have a lot of animals that are similar to it. It's been on this continent for over 1 million years, and has been evolving on this continent on its own. Its Latin name actually means the American goat antelope, which just tells you that it's distantly related to goats. Why does it run so fast? It's kind of a cool story. It turns out, as far as we can tell, it evolved with some very fast predators just after the last ice age and before it. And those predators were very fast. And essentially, this antelope is still running from the ghosts of its previous predators. There's nothing can catch it anymore. But a long time ago, there were some big cats on the prairies that used to be able to catch it. The American dipper is another one of my very close friends. That when I was young and got to spend time hiking in the Rocky Mountains, I got to meet this little guy. It's a beautiful little songbird that you find high up in the mountains, that lives in these fast-moving, clear streams. And what makes it really cool is it actually hunts underwater, and it doesn't swim. It actually jumps into the water and jumps to the bottom and walks along the bottom of these little creeks, hunting for insects at the bottom of the creeks. And it does this partly because it has essentially its own set of goggles. It manages to lower down these extra set of eyelids that allow it to see clearly underwater. The name is kind of quirky. It just means a tail wagging bird. And if you ever see it in the wild, you'll know why, because the dipper motion, it dips up and down and wags its tail as it prepares to jump into these fast flowing cold creeks looking for insects. Where I live now, we have these really cool animals, wild turkeys. Love them or hate them, they are probably one of the biggest conservation success stories of the last quarter century. So wild turkeys used to be in Eastern Canada. They were almost extirpated, which means they were almost made extinct in Canada through overhunting. And conservation biologists like myself worked really hard to bring these species back and regulate hunting. And now they're throughout Ontario and Quebec, and there's spring and fall hunting seasons. They are just a super interesting kind of ridiculous looking, ridiculous sounding, but really fun bird. And their Latin name actually means the wild chicken peacock, which again kind of hints at the other birds it's related to. So peacocks, and also noting, of course, that they are a wild bird and really important to people in North America. Got a couple more friends I'd like to introduce you to, and I wanted to make sure one of my friends included reptiles, because the reptiles get a bad rap sometimes, but they're a really cool animal. And the garter snake is by far the most common snake in Canada and in North America. I find this friend really interesting because it's managed to survive in some really inhospitable environments. You can find this little guy living way northern Canada up into the Yukon. It even gets into the Northwest Territories, which for a reptile is really amazing. And they're quite benign. They're very kind. They're not a threat to people at all. And they're just an interesting little predator that, if you look carefully around the woods, you can often find them on a hot summer day. And its Latin name, it means the striped bush snake. And the stripes kind of refer to a piece of clothing that you don't see much anymore, but is called a garter. That's where the English name comes from. And boy, living in this part of the world, I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce you to a few of my friends and the raccoon. And actually, this photo is a photo I took just a few days ago. These four little guys, I tried to remove them from the attic of my garage. I think it goes without saying that the raccoons are an awfully cute little animal. Their Latin name actually means the little washing dog, because they're well known for their habit of constantly washing themselves and washing the food they eat. I don't want to leave anybody worried that these little guys are in any trouble. I actually moved them out of my attic into another little habitat I built for them. Didn't last long though. The mom came back, as I expected she would. I was hoping she'd live in the new habitat, and instead she picked them right back up and moved them right back into the attic above my garage. So they're safe there, and once they're grown up, I will kindly ask them to move on to a more natural habitat. But one of the reasons I like these friends is they're one of the wildlife friends that has done really well adapting to human habitats, cities, towns, and villages. Very intelligent, very adaptable, very widely distributed, and very cute. So give a bit of thought to this question as well. I'm going to ask you this later in the chat, but I introduced you to a few of my friends, and give us some thought to who are some of your wild friends and where do they live, and why are they your friends? I'm sure that you all have at least one animal that you relate to. Could even be your dog or cat. They're not so far removed from wild animals either. But think about that a little bit. I'd be really interested in hearing who are some of your wild friends and where they live. So parks for animals. Well, there's a whole bunch of parks around the world that, as I said, were made for all kinds of different reasons. I'm just going to show you a couple and talk about them briefly. So Grand Canyon National Park down in Arizona in the US, spectacular park. It was established largely because it's a beautiful area, and the government at the time really wanted to attract more people to come down and check it out. So this park protects the area from development and from significant disturbance. And now it's home for all kinds of really cool animals, like this collared lizard you see in the photo on the bottom right. Really interesting place. Closer to home, for me anyway, is Madawaska River Provincial Park. And this is a great little canoeing area. The park was actually set up to protect the river from development so that people could enjoy it as a wild river. And it's a great paddling river, great rafting river, and it's home to species like brook trout, which is a really fascinating, really interesting wild fish in Canada. Jumping way across to the other side of the world, this is a really beautiful place, and it's a World Heritage Site, another kind of park for actually established for people, but is home to all kinds of interesting wildlife. Some of that wildlife actually works really closely with people, including the camels you see here that are often used to bring people to the top of Mount Sinai. This is one of my favorite places in the world, Okefenokee Swamp. I love the name. It's a national wildlife refuge on the border between Georgia and Florida. It's not the kind of place most people would go to, but if you like wildlife and you like making new wild friends, I highly recommend it. It's got these beautiful cypress trees with the Spanish moss hanging down, and the density of alligators is just incredible. When I went there with my wife and my son actually took out his notebook and just started writing down how many alligators he was seeing because he couldn't quite believe it. And in just one day of paddling, we saw 150 alligators. So this is a great example of a park that was established for animals, and you can see that in the name. It's a national wildlife refuge. It's a refuge for wild creatures like the American alligator. Super interesting place. And then closer to home in Alberta is Canadian Forces-based Suffield National Wildlife Area. So this is an extensive grasslands area where conservation biologists not only established a park for animals, but brought some animals back that had been removed from the area from hunting years ago. And that's the elk that you see on your screen that was brought back to the prairies. The little coyote hiding in the sagebrush here is looking over at the elk, and I don't know if they're friends or not, but they certainly live in the same place in this other park for animals. So yeah, where will you go? There's every city, town in Canada has a park nearby. It could be a provincial park, it could be a national park, it could be a wildlife area. There's tons of stuff to see and do, and yeah, give some thought to where will you go? I'd be curious in the chat to hear about some place you'd like to go and see some of these wild animals. All right, so just think for a minute about your animal friends here, the kind of things that they need, so if you close your eyes for 1 second and think of your animal friend, think about, well, what do they eat? What do they need to be safe? What do they need to be able to raise a family, to travel safely? Sometimes that question is sort of easy to answer. If you close your eyes and think about the raccoon living in my garage, well, they eat pretty much everything. And what do they need to be safe? Well, right now, while the mom's raising her young kids, they need a quiet, dark space that's away from predators. And to be able to travel safely, well, they sure have to worry about roads when they come out of that attic, because the kids won't know much about cars and roads. So they need either bridges, or they need tunnels to get under the roads, or they need things to be able to survive and to thrive. So think about your favorite animal and think for a little bit about all those things. What do they need to eat? What do they need to be safe? What do they need to be to raise a family? So for my job, like, how do we know where to make parks for animals? When, of course, the answer is we use science. So here's the big definition. Science is the study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world. And we to study things, to study the world around us, we use observation, we look at things, we use experimentation, and we test theories against the evidence we obtain. So I'm just going to walk you through one example of how we use science to create parks for animals. So hopefully you can see this little video. I took this video a few years ago when I was up in the Northwest Territories. These are wild wood bison. The Latin name Bison athabascae means the wild ox from Lake Athabasca. And these incredible creatures were nearly extirpated, like nearly extinct in Canada over 100 years ago. They're now found in Wood Buffalo National Park and in the Northwest Territories and in Alberta. So let's talk a little bit about making a park for bison. All right, so the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, well, what do bison eat? So eating, of course, is important for every living creature. You have to eat to obtain enough energy to be able to get through your day and to survive. So the first question a scientist asks is, well, what do bison eat? And this won't surprise you guys, but bison eat grasses. And they get healthier when they eat good quality grass, and they stay healthier when that grass is easy to reach. So, well, that one's not too hard. So we figured that out. Though keep in mind, look at the, when we think about wild animals, we often think of summertime when the living is easy. It's easy to find food, easy to get around. But when we think about what they need to eat, we have to also think, well, what about in the wintertime? How easy is it to get to grass and quality grass to be able to build up enough energy in their bodies so that they can generate enough heat to survive the winter? That's another interesting consideration for scientists that are trying to make a park for bison. Okay, well then we say we know what these guys eat, and then we got to figure out, well, how much food do they need? Well, not surprisingly, bison need a lot of grass, and a big herd of bison needs a heck of a lot of grass. So basically, we just multiply the number of bison we think we want that we want to we preserve by the amount of food that they need. And then we try and find basically a meadow in the forest big enough for a bison herd. Remember, these are wood bison, so they actually live in the woods in northern Canada. And to find enough grass and high quality grass, they have to go forage in the meadows in between the trees in the forest. So we multiply the number of bison we have by the amount of grass they need, and then we try and go looking for a meadow big enough for those bison. Well, okay, that sounds pretty easy. But okay, how do we go finding a meadow? Well, we could walk all over northern Canada, but that would take us our whole lifetime. So instead of that, we use satellite imagery, and there's a whole bunch of different satellite platforms out there right now that can create all kinds of different imagery. And actually, for your classes, there's some great online tools that let you do collect satellite imagery and analyze it in your own classroom right now. But for us and for us in the science business, it's not so different. We download a whole bunch of satellite images and we analyze them in a computer geographic information system. So you're looking at a satellite image of obviously some lakes and some rivers and some deltas and some forests and some mountains. We have to turn all those colors into some kind of map of vegetation. So that's the next step. We take the satellite imagery, and then we go and we make a map. We make a map of land cover. We process that imagery in a computer, and we train the computer to figure out, okay, which parts of this image are forests, which parts are water, which parts are meadows, which are rock, and which are ice. And then we have a map of meadows. We're like, okay, great. We know where the meadows are. Now what? What's the next step? Okay, well, we should probably consider some other factors. So it's not just meadows that are important. It's not just food that's important. You got to consider factors like predators. Well, wolves are a big predator on bison, and we should probably do some work to figure out how easy it is for wolves to get to bison. A big, wide open meadow is pretty easy picking for wolves to find bison. But if it's a smaller meadow in the forest where bison can escape to the woods, maybe that's a better meadow than a big open meadow. So we do some science, we do some reading, we look at the literature, we go out in the field, we collect some observations, and we try and figure out, well, what's the right size and shape of a meadow that makes it really good for bison. And then we do a bit other research. We think about, okay, what about things like cars? Like cars could be dangerous for bison. We should probably analyze like how many roads there are and how many cars are on those roads, and are those roads safe for bison? And then we put all that into our computer geographic information system, and we create something called a suitability map. How suitable, how appropriate, how good is the habitat for bison? So we make a map of our meadows and we analyze those meadows considering predators, roads, and how connected our meadows are. And we make this big habitat suitability map using our computer geographic information system. And then next part is we should test the theory. We now have a theory. We created a nice map. It's got some pretty colors. It shows where we think the best habitat is for bison. Well, we better test this out. So now the fun part comes. Well, we go out and we catch some bison, actually quite a few bison, and then we put a satellite tracking collar on them. That's what you can see on this bison here. And then we let our bison go and we test our theory. We follow those bison using satellite imagery or telemetry data, and we collect a whole bunch of information and see if these bison are actually using the meadows that we thought they would be using. And we do that for a while, a year or 2 years, and kind of test things out. And then we adjust our model and think it through and make a better suitability map. And then finally we have a map that we've tested against the data, and we say, okay, we really think this area is the best place for bison. So the next step is we take all that information and we go and we make a park. So we make a boundary, or at least a proposed boundary. And then we talk to everyone about that boundary. We talk to industry. We talk to indigenous governments. We talk to environmental organizations, and we get their opinion. And we say, here's what we think is the best boundary to make sure we have a really good park for animals. And then we get everybody's agreement, and maybe we adjust the boundary, make some changes, we make some compromises. And then once we've done all that and everybody's in agreement, then we make some rules about how to manage the park. Well, we should probably have a rule about not hunting bison, and we should probably have some rules about visiting the park. And then once we've done that and we've set the rules, then we go find some friends to help manage that park. And that those can be other government organizations, it can be Indigenous peoples, it can be environmental organizations, but we make a boundary, we make some rules, and we make and then we collaborate with other people to manage our park. And that's it. That's essentially super easy story about how we go and we make parks for animals. And at the end of all that, hopefully, if we've done our job right, then we have ensured that our friends are going to be safe. And again, we're using science, the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the natural world, and we test that through experimentation against the evidence we have to make sure we're doing the right thing. The last thing we do for our friends, of course, is we go out in the field and we monitor to see that our bison herds are healthy, that they're safe, and that they're continuing to grow and thrive in the park that we made for them. So that's my super short presentation. I'm going to leave you with one thought and a really cute photo, I hope. This is actually my son when he was really young with a burrowing owl. It's a little owl that lives in prairie dog colonies in Western Canada. And this is the one thing I think is really important is I think it's really important for all of us to connect with nature whenever we can, to watch, listen, and learn. Nature has a lot to teach, and you don't have to go far. You don't have to go to the Grand Canyon or to Okefenokee. You can just go outside in your schoolyard and you can just listen. Right now, of course, the Canada geese are flying overhead. Once in a while, the sandhill cranes are passing by. And it's just interesting to think about, where they're going and why, and, how all this natural world works. It's a super interesting world out there. There's lots to learn, lots to experience. And I encourage everybody to get out there and experience the natural world and connect with nature whenever you can.
Olaf, that couldn't be a better presentation if it tried. Also, thank you for incorporating a burrowing owl at all, because almost no one knows they exist, and they're the most charismatic and wonderful owl in the world. I love them. We had some really great participation from our classes. So Ms. Brundage's class live, our YouTubers, thank you guys for chiming in so much. Olaf, if you want to come out of screen share entirely so you can see all of us and have a conversation, maybe save a little bandwidth, you're welcome to do so. Ms. Brundage, I'm going to head to you guys in Ottawa for a question in just a second. You can put your thinking caps on for just a minute before we go live with you. One of our first questions that we got was if you have a favorite part of your job. I mean, it all sounds pretty spectacular, frankly, but is there something in particular that gets you up in the morning, or any specific species that you like the most that you really want to protect?
And I don't know if I got out of my screen share appropriately. I can just see myself and you. Am I doing something else?
Oh, yeah, you're good, man. You're perfect.
Okay, cool. Well, that's a nice question. I have to admit, when I was younger, I spent a lot more time in the field. Most of my job now is in the office, which is a really important part of making parks for animals. Somebody has to make the rules and make the connections. Yeah, is there the part of my job I really like? Honestly, there's a part of our job where we try and connect people with nature. And I gotta admit, I love seeing people make those connections with nature. So at some of our national wildlife areas, we actually have migratory bird banding stations. And this is where we do the work of banding birds to study, where they go and all that kind of stuff. And we invite people to come out there, kids and classes to participate in that work. And part of that means most people get a chance to hold a wild bird and have a look at it and then let it go into the wild. Sometimes it's owls, sometimes it's songbirds, but seeing people make that connection with nature, I really love that. That's one of the things that gets me up in the morning.
That's about an answer that we get from all sorts of conservationists, storytellers from all over the world. So I'm really glad that that's your pick. This is something that we've actually featured a lot of bird banding on our programs. Every single year we bring in the Lucky Peak Bird Banding Station, Prince Edward Point Bird Station in the US and Canada, respectively, to see them released on the wing. So that's always really, really cool. If you don't have the chance to head to one of those places directly, Olaf, you mentioned something along these lines, but I really encourage our classes. get the seek, get the iNaturalist staff, go out, explore, take pictures of what you discover. You'd be amazed how many species live close to you wherever you are in the world, whether it's the rainforest or heart of a major city. So no better message.
Well, and it's super interesting, Jesse. Sometimes, I think as humans, for some reason, we always think nature is somewhere else, and there's somewhere else we need to go to learn something. But there's so much just in our backyard. And one of my favorite science studies was done by a guy. I don't think this was actually pre-COVID. Just realized that looking at the chat here, and somebody mentioned squirrels, and squirrels are fascinating because they're kind of everywhere to the point that we almost forget they're there. And he tried to answer the age-old question, like, how many squirrels are there? And this guy actually lived in New York and did a study of how many squirrels are in Central Park. And you'd think it'd be an easy question to answer, but this guy devoted like 5 years of his life trying to figure out how many squirrels are in Central Park. And it turns out there's an awful lot of them, and they interact a lot together. And he had a really good time just trying to figure out what are all the relationships and how do you count them. And anyway, the point being, you don't have to go far to have a really interesting life studying nature. It's literally in your backyard if you want to study the raccoons in my attic or the squirrels in your trees in your yard.
I'm going to head to Ms. Brendan's class in a minute, but just to elaborate on that point too, we do something called the 10-minute nature challenge as part of Backyard Bio every May. And I basically encourage any class, if you go into your backyard or a local park, you will find like 25, 30 species of wildlife in like 10 minutes, pretty much wherever you are. So go check that out when you're done the broadcast. Don't leave just yet. Stay for 10 more minutes. But just a quick note for everybody as we head to our Ottawa class. Ms. Brendan's class, thanks for being so patient. Come on in and take us away.
Hey, there we are.
Hello.
Everybody turn around.
Hi. Go for it if you have a question for us.
Does anybody have a question? Question for anything? Okay, Manathi, you speak in. I think you can speak it. Can you hear us?
Oh yeah, perfectly.
Okay, they can hear us. So Manathi has a question.
Okay. Do they also keep invasive species in the parks?
Do they keep invasive species in the parks?
Yeah.
Did he say invasive or endangered?
Invasive is what we're going for. Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there are. Great question. We got a very knowledgeable scientist in the audience already. That's great. Invasive species are everywhere. And part of the job of park management is to figure out, are there invasive species? Are they a problem for other species? So generally, when we make a park for animals, we have an animal that's the primary species for the park. Like it could be a bison, it could be a burrowing owl. And then once we know what invasive species we have, we're like, okay, well, is this invasive species a problem? Like, does it make the food less high quality for our animal? Does it threaten the animal in some way? And if the answer is yes, then one of our jobs as park managers is to try and remove that threat. So to try and remove the invasive species. Some invasive species, though, are just so prevalent and so hard to remove, there's not much we can do. And a really good example in our backyard, of course, is the zebra mussel, which has been changing environments around Ontario for the last 25, 30 years. And some of those effects are very positive. Like you'll see much more clear water in the Great Lakes. It's actually been really good for ducks that like eating mussels. So, when we look at invasive species, a lot of them are changing their environments, but sometimes not necessarily for the worst. Like sometimes they're making those changes in ways that have a positive effect on the environment. But those are all really good science questions that we have to figure out. What is the change? Is it important? And is it detrimental to the species we're trying to protect? So great question.
It's a great question. It's so suitable because literally last week we did a program called Keeping Park Waters Healthy with another partnership series at Parks Canada, all about zebra mussels and quagga mussels in Waterton Lakes in Alberta. So if you want to check that out, again, like all our programs, it's on our YouTube channel. If you type that in, if you want to learn more about invasive species, how they're dealt with in parks, some of the challenges, benefits, everything you were saying, Olaf, and encapsulated in a program. I know it takes more than we can do in just a Q&A session, but that's a really great thing to keep learning going if you're keen, guys. So thanks for that question, everybody. We're going to take one more from YouTube, and then we're going to head to Ms. Brendan's class. Again, time flies, and you're having fun in these broadcasts. We got the chance to learn so much today. Olaf, one of the questions is, are there countries in the world that do this really, really well? So we're like, I think everyone in the call is Canadian today. We've got a big US audience as well. I've certainly seen some of the amazing stuff that's been done for conservation in Parks Canada, making sure that there's areas just for wildlife. But is there sort of like a gold standard? Costa Rica is a place that might jump to mind for some of the work that we've done generally, but any stalwarts that you can share with us?
Oh, wow. Well, there's such a diversity of parks around the world. Even just in Canada, there's something like 75 different kinds of parks. And certainly Parks Canada does a really great job with their national parks. I really think the National Wildlife Refuge System in the US, they do a really, really great job. They're not terribly well known, but certainly like Okefenokee Swamp. If you're ever down in Georgia, Florida, highly recommend a visit to that part of the world. Every country does it a bit differently. They adapt to their own ecology. Costa Rica is a gold standard for sure in terms of the size of their protected areas network. They're also home to mega diverse ecosystems. Like the amount of biodiversity there is just incredible. And then other countries, Australia is doing a really great job with indigenous protected areas. And although Russia obviously has its political problems, they've got some really interesting approaches to protected areas where in eastern Russia, they're actually proposing to bring back mastodons like woolly mammoths and create a park that looks like the ecosystems that were there 10,000 years ago. So yeah, the diversity, just like in ecology where ecosystem and genetic diversity is important, it's the same in protected areas. There's no one protected area that's perfect, and probably diversity is the most important thing.
That's a beautiful answer, Olaf. And thank you for including Russia in that. It's interesting, especially with the context, but it really is a gold standard in a lot of ways as well. So I like that very, very much. Okefenokee, by the way, one of my dream all-time places to visit. I've been lucky to go to the States quite a few times, but those forests, to be able to paddle through something like that just looks like pure magic. So I'm so glad you featured it today.
The only thing they don't need at Okefenokee, which they do have, is when you get there, there's a no swimming sign, which seems just redundant.
Yes, I'm gonna stay away from potentially being an afternoon snack. Miss Brundage's class, we're gonna head to you guys one last time. Again, I want to stress for everyone, this is part of our Changing Planet 3 series. This will be on our YouTube channel if you want to check out tomorrow's broadcast on wildlife warriors, our frog and bird broadcast the last 2 days. It's a really special opportunity to learn from some really cool scientists like Olaf. So please do take a chance to check that out. But we're gonna wrap up with one more question before we go. Come on in, Miss Brundage's class, and take us away. Hey.
Okay, so how many animals have you dealt with?
How many? Do you want to repeat?
Me personally? Oh,
Yeah.
boy. Oh, that's a very sweet question. I can't even. I sort of lost count. Though close up and personal encounters. So I'll just tell you a story to get you all excited about working in conservation. So for a few years, I worked in Elk Island National Park in Alberta, which is home to really high density bison, wood bison, plains bison, and elk. And not only did we get to see these animals, but we actually got to capture them. So when I made that point in my presentation about catching bison, that's what we actually did for our job. We catch bison and elk, and we would put collars on them and we would study them. So that stuff's really exciting. And then the burrowing owls, the picture you saw of the burrowing owl there, that was an owl that was actually the nest where we found that owl was predated. A badger had destroyed the nest, and that one owl had survived. So my colleagues with the Canadian Wildlife Service actually took it home and hand raised it for the purpose of having an owl that could go to schools. So Nappy, which is the Blackfoot name for trickster, was the school owl, and we'd take him to various places and do school shows with him. And he actually lived in our house for a little while and used to swoop up and down the stairs, making all the noise at night. But my kids thought it was absolutely fantastic having an owl in the house. So if you decide to get into the conservation business, there is like an unlimited number of animals that you could deal with. And I hope all of you have that experience to get up close and personal with nature, because it's super fun connecting with nature that way.
it's there's very seldom do we get an answer that's that personal. So thank you very much for that question. For our kids that are keen on conservation, it's the biggest part of what we do. We've got our park series, we've got this environment and climate change series, we've got Wild Hope in conjunction with some of the coolest conservationists on planet Earth with a whole bunch of broadcasts in the next few weeks. So please do come check us out on our YouTube channel. So much more to learn. We'd love to have you sign up for even more. And Olaf, this has been such a fun presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today, man, and for your expertise and passion for all of this. And yeah, before we let you go and I bring in Miss Brenda to this class to say thank you and farewell, is there any final message you want to leave us with? I know that last one was pretty good, but I'll give you the opportunity if there's any last thing to cap off the broadcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jesse, and thanks for your enthusiasm. Just, I guess, a message to everyone out there that just to encourage all of you to get outside and connect with nature. I know, we often hear, but we all know about the bad news in the world and the bad stories, but it's a changing world for sure, but it's a really interesting world. There's lots to do, lots to see, lots to explore. You definitely don't have to go far. You can just go right down the street to your local park or across the river or wherever. And really encourage you, if I was to say any message, get outside, connect with nature, and enjoy the time you have outdoors.
I'm literally heading out for a walk right after this broadcast is done, so I'm going to take your message to heart. We are going to bring in Miss Brenda's class. YouTubers, if you want to yell and scream at home too and annoy the principal, please do. But thank you so much, Ottawa, for joining us today live. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Bye for now, guys.
Thank you.